The subcommittees on intelligence and counterterrorism and border security, facilitation, and operations will come to order. Thank you all so much for being here. I understand some of our colleagues are en route. I want to thank my colleague, Chairwoman Rice, for convening this joint subcommittee hearing with me today, and to Ranking Members Walker and Higgins, thank you so much as well. We are here today to very simply discuss the threat of terrorist travel into the United States and how we can use a fact-based approach to prevent terrorists from entering the country. I want to be just plain and simple clear about this. The greatest responsibility of a government is to keep its citizens safe. That principle is always going to be my North Star, all of our North Stars. But just because we care deeply about keeping Americans safe doesn't mean that we have the opportunity to not make public policy based off fact. Our policy should be grounded in reality, based off real data, and we need to always go where the actual threat is today, not yesterday's threat. That's what our brave men and women are doing in uniform, whether it's at the local level, NYPD, which I have back home, to federal law enforcement officials each and every day. It's also what our U.S. soldiers are doing. So we're here today, as I said, to follow the threat as it particularly pertains to terrorist travel. This administration has introduced a number of policies on immigration and border security, to include the Muslim ban. And they've done this claiming in part that these policies are necessary to keep us safe from terrorists. In December 2015, then candidate Donald Trump called for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what's going on, end quote. So in part today, we're also here to get a status update on how things are going as you continue to figure out what's going on, as we all do. After that came a series of travel bans, which were challenged in court and then implemented. You all have seen that story. But we have truly instituted some significant human misery as a result of this. I have constituents in my district who are American citizens, have American citizen children. They cannot bring their family back from Yemen because of the Muslim ban. I sincerely want to know whether this is worth it. Whether it's worth it to discriminate against millions of people around the world simply on the basis of their faith. Or for that matter, does a border wall from sea to shining sea actually keep us safe from terrorist threats? We're here to talk about the facts and only the facts. I want to hear about the hard work that our government officials are putting in to actually keep terrorist threats out of our country. I want to hear about the threats that they're seeing on the ground and how they are responding to them with the latest technological tools. We want to support the programs that work, the ones that are based on real data, real threats. So I look forward to having a constructive conversation today with my Democratic and Republican colleagues, and of course with our witnesses, and to make sure that we are doing everything possible to prevent another terrorist threat, to prevent another terrorist attack. As a New Yorker, you understand the significance that this comes with for me in particular. We have had 3 terrorist attacks just in the last several years. This is a threat that New Yorkers live with on a daily basis, the fear of when will the next attack come. As a housekeeping note, I do also need to express my disappointment that witness testimony was not received from DHS 48 hours prior to the hearing. It's vital that all of our witnesses play by the same rules. I hope that the gentleman and the department as a whole can abide by these standards in the future. And with that, I thank all of our witnesses for joining us this morning. And I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Walker, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you holding this hearing. The security and facilitation of people and goods crossing the U.S. borders is one of the fundamental responsibilities of the government and a core mission set of the Department of Homeland Security, especially in the aftermath of the September 11th terror attacks. Since that time, major enhancements have been made to the policies, to the technology, and information sharing agreements related to border vetting agreements and programs. Each time a vulnerability is discovered, such as the 2009 Christmas Day bomber, the 2011 arrest of 2 Iraqi refugees in Kentucky linked to al-Qaeda, and the 2015 San Bernardino attack. With each one of these vulnerabilities, additional improvements have and are continuing to be made. This is a clear commitment and sense of urgency across the Department of Homeland Security and intelligence agencies to ensure our vetting programs are as robust as possible. We all know, however, that terrorists and criminals continually assess U.S. systems for weaknesses. Therefore, we must continually evaluate, test, and upgrade vetting programs to prevent, detect, and deter travel to the United States. I want to applaud the efforts of President Trump to further harden vetting systems through the creation of the National Vetting Center and the December 2018 release of the terror travel strategy. I'm looking forward to hearing more from the witnesses in just a few minutes on these initiatives. The American public demands and deserves secure borders and security programs that connect the dots. The bottom line is that one terrorist slipping through these lines is unacceptable. I want to thank the panel for their service and for appearing here today. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now recognize my co-chair for this hearing, Ms. Rice, Chairwoman of the Border Security Facilitation and Operations Subcommittee, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's hearing topic is one that I've worked on for several years now as a member of this committee. The subcommittee I now chair has previously examined U.S. visa security and passenger pre-screening programs, which continue to be vital in preventing terrorist travel and addressing potential threats to the homeland. I want to underscore that these programs are an essential part of our border security apparatus. Many of the screening and vetting protocols that Congress has implemented over the past 2 decades stem from lessons learned after the 9/11 terror attacks and the attempted bombing attack on Christmas Day 2009. Most recently, our screening and vetting efforts have shifted to address the growing threat posed by foreign fighters who joined or supported terrorist groups abroad. These cases illustrate that we can no longer associate terrorist threats with a single country or region. Rather, foreign fighters hold citizenships and passports from nearly every country on earth, from France, England, and Germany to China, Russia, the Philippines, and more. A terrorist threat can come from anywhere in the world, and the only way to effectively combat this threat is by partnering with foreign governments, sharing information, and implementing targeted risk-based methods to detect and identify threats before they enter this country. However, broad executive actions, such as the president's travel ban, are not the solution. In fact, they are counterproductive and make us less safe. They divert resources and focus from our research-based targeted efforts, and they polarize an issue that must be bipartisan. Unfortunately, much of this administration's approach to border security follows that same hyper-partisan and ham-handed approach. Over the past 3 years, policy debates about screening and vetting protocols have been almost entirely centered on our southern land border. And while the U.S.-Mexico border is a critical and relevant part of this discussion, we must also recognize that border security is a much broader and more nuanced topic than what the current debate has allowed for. Today's hearing is an opportunity for us to discuss these nuances and gain a deeper understanding of how we can make smart, targeted investments in our border security protocols. For example, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency is woefully understaffed. CBP officers are our eyes and ears on the ground. They are our first line of defense when it comes to preventing terrorist travel, and for the past 2 years, the Trump administration has not taken any substantive steps to address the agency's startling number of vacancies. Additionally, law enforcement agencies at every level should be able to make use of new technologies and screening methods to more effectively track and identify potential threats before they reach our border. This means expanding our counterterrorism work to new fronts, including social media and other forms of online communications that could help identify foreign fighters and stem terrorist recruitment. And we need to be able to do all of this, from staffing up CBP to enhancing screening protocols, without unnecessarily burdening lawful travel or infringing upon an individual's right to privacy. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about how we can better deploy targeted fact-based vetting methods to keep our homeland safe. I thank our witnesses for joining us this morning to have this discussion, and I also thank Chairman Rose for agreeing to pursue this topic jointly today. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I now recognize the ranking member of the Border Security Facilitation and Operations Subcommittee, Mr. Higgins, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairwoman. In the years following the 9/11 attacks, the United States government went to great lengths to identify gaps in our vetting systems and in how our agencies share intelligence. The Department of Homeland Security was created to ensure that the American people are protected from a range of threats, including those who seek entry into our nation to conduct acts of terror, which will be our focus today. Currently, individuals attempting to enter our country are vetted against multiple databases, including the Terrorist Watch List, the State Department Consular Lookout and Support System, and the FBI National Crime Information Center. Yet there are multiple agencies that serve as a primary repository of these vetting databases and processes. Our nation cannot afford to let one person fall through the cracks due to an information sharing gap. I support the Trump administration's creation of the National Vetting Center to consolidate all U.S. government screening and vetting operations under one roof, led by DHS, senior Department of State and Justice officials, and members of the intelligence community. The NVC will enable 24/7 recurrent vetting of visas and travel documents to help push out our borders and prevent known and suspected terrorists from reaching U.S. soil. Centralizing the vetting process is a good step, but we also need to ensure that our vetting accounts for technological innovation and emerging threats. I'm specifically interested in the use of biometrics such as facial recognition software and fingerprint collection, as well as social media vetting. Biometric entry and exit pilots have already caught people using fraudulent documents at some of our nation's international airports. We must expand this 9/11 Commission recommendation to all international airports and other ports of entry as soon as possible. Social media vetting provides the department with another tool to make sure that those seeking to travel to the United States are not publicly stating that they wish to do us harm. We also cannot ignore the high numbers of illegal entry attempts to our country and visa overstays. When people can enter or remain in our country illegally, we have a security gap that known or suspected terrorists can exploit. I'm very concerned about the catch and release situation that's occurring at our southwest border right now and the national security risk associated with it. We must ensure that our Homeland Security components are fully funded to address changing dynamics at our border and ports of entry. Today, I'd like to hear from our witnesses about the vetting we're doing to prevent terrorist travel to the homeland, methods terrorists are using to attempt entry into our country, threats posed by lack of operational control of our borders, any changes in the terrorist travel threat dynamic, and how biometrics are being used to update our vetting capability. I would like to thank the witnesses before us today for your service. I look forward to hearing your testimony, and I yield my balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. Additionally, I ask unanimous consent that the members of the full committee shall be permitted to sit and question the witnesses as appropriate. Without objection, so ordered. I welcome our panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Donald Conroy, who serves as the Director of the National Targeting Center for Passenger Operations within U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. Prior to serving in this capacity, Mr. Conroy was Area Port Director for the Detroit Airport in the Detroit Field Office of CBP for 2 years. Next, we are joined by Mr. Monty Hawkins, who currently serves as the Department of Homeland Security's first Director of the National Vetting Center. Prior to this position, Mr. Hawkins served as the Senior Director for the Border and Transportation Security Directorate in the National Security Council. Finally, we have Ms. Rebecca Gambler, who serves as the Director of the Homeland Security and Justice Team within the Government Accountability Office. Ms. Gambler joined GAO in 2002 and currently leads the agency's work on border security, immigration, and election issues. Without objection, the witness's full statements will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his or her statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Conroy. And again, thank you all so much for taking the time and for your service to this country.
Chairman Rice, Chairman Rose, Ranking Member Higgins, and Ranking Member Walker, and distinguished subcommittee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. CBP is the unified border agency of the United States, and as such, we are responsible for securing our nation's border while facilitating the flow of legitimate travel and trade. Every day, we welcome more than 1 million travelers to the United States. Over the course of fiscal year 2018, CBP inspected more than 413 million travelers at 328 ports of entry. The unfortunate reality of this threat environment means that terrorists and others who present a significant danger to the public are among those seeking to enter the United States. In order to stop them, CBP works in close partnership with federal law enforcement, intelligence community, state and local law enforcement, the private sector, and our foreign counterparts. CBP and its partners work to address risk at each stage of the travel process. At the time of application to travel, the ticket purchase or reservation, check-in at a foreign airport, and an arrival at the United States. By receiving advanced information and employing sophisticated targeting systems to detect risk and acting through a global network, we can address risk or prevent movement of identified threats to the United States at the earliest point in their travel. As the director of the National Targeting Center's Passenger Division, I'd like to discuss our role in preventing terrorist travel. The National Targeting Center, or NTC, is a 24/7 operation that makes extensive use of intelligence materials and law enforcement data. This allows analysts and targeting officers to make informed decisions at all points of the travel continuum. Starting with the earliest indications of potential travel, such as electronic system of travel authorizations, applications, visa applications, and passenger manifest, and continuing through the inspections and arrival process, we are continually analyzing information and using CBP's Automating Targeting System, or ATS. I'd like to discuss automation and targeting. Technology is an integral part of CBP's efforts to prevent terrorist travel. ATS is a decision support tool for CBP officers that compares information and travelers arriving in, transiting through, and exiting the country against law enforcement and intelligence information. This allows us to identify individuals who require additional scrutiny for issues related to national security, law enforcement, customs, immigration, agriculture, and other reasons. This information is also matched against targeting rules developed by subject matter experts. CBP identifies unknown high-risk individuals by comparing their information against a set of targeting rules based on intelligence, law enforcement, and other information. The NTC analyzes information about every traveler, including U.S. citizens, before departure to identify possible matches to the government's consolidated terrorist watch list, Interpol's lost and stolen passport information, criminal activity, fraud, and malified travelers. Through direct networks with commercial airlines and connections to CBP officers overseas as part of the Immigration Advisory Program, NTC officials are able to issue no-board recommendations to airlines to keep high-risk passengers from traveling to the United States who would otherwise likely be found inadmissible at entry. In fiscal year 2018, the NTC and Immigration Advisory Program and the regional carrier liaison groups led CBP efforts to prevent the boarding of 16,900 high-risk travelers destined for the United States, a 6% increase from fiscal year 17. The NTC vetting process for international passengers continues while the flight is en route to the United States. In the event new information is discovered, this allows us to identify travelers who, although they may not be national security risks, may need to be further reviewed or referred for more thorough inspection at the first port of entry upon arrival into the United States. In addition to expanding the nation's zone of security beyond the United States, improving operational efficiencies, the National Targeting Center's pre-departure programs results in significant monetary savings. By preventing inadmissible passengers from boarding flights to the United States, where they would most likely be processed by CBP for refusal or removal, we eliminate additional detention and processing costs for the government and additional repatriation expenses for commercial carriers. The NTC works constantly to strengthen existing relationships and build new partnerships within DHS and the U.S. Interagency, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Transportation Security Administration, U.S. Coast Guard, Department of State, and the Department of Defense, to name a few. International partnerships are also a priority. For example, the NTC is a key participant in hosts the International Targeting Center, the first of its kind targeting cell with personnel from the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and the United Kingdom that coordinate joint multilateral targeting efforts. Also co-located with the NTC is the National Vetting Center, or NVC. The NVC is a collaborative interagency effort to provide a clear picture on the threats to national security and border security and public safety posed by individuals seeking to transit our borders or exploit our immigration systems. My colleague, Director Monty Hawkins, will discuss the NVC in greater detail. In conclusion, with our partners, CBP has built a multi-layered approach for vetting, identifying, and taking appropriate action to prevent travelers from arriving in the United States who may pose a threat to the homeland, and will continue to use all means within our authority to protect the nation and its citizens. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Hawkins to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Rice, Chairman Rose, Ranking Member Higgins, Ranking Member Walker, and distinguished subcommittee members, thank you for the opportunity to appear for you today. My name is Monty Hawkins, and I'm the Director of the National Vetting Center, or NVC. I'd like to discuss our role in preventing terrorist travel. The NVC was established more than a year ago when President Trump signed National Security Presidential Memorandum No. 9. In that memorandum, the President directed the Secretary of Homeland Security, in coordination with the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and the Director of National Intelligence, to establish the NVC to improve the manner in which agencies coordinate and use information to identify threats to national security. Since September 11th, 2001, agencies have independently incorporated new technologies and processes to improve the way they leverage sensitive intelligence and law enforcement information when vetting applicants for travel and immigration-related benefits. However, these processes were often designed for single uses, only leveraged portions of relevant information, and weren't adaptable to address an evolving all-threats landscape. They did not maximize our ability to provide this sensitive information in a timely and effective manner. What was missing was a single coordinating entity to address these issues and ensure that adjudicators at the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, and elsewhere receive what they need when they need it from national security partners. The NVC was created to solve these problems by providing a common technology platform and process to allow for a coordinated and comprehensive review of relevant information. It streamlines the transfer of unclassified applicant and traveler information to classified environments where it is compared against highly restricted information held by national security partners. The NVC does not make any adjudications itself, though. Instead, it presents the results of these comparisons in a single user interface for use by the agencies responsible for adjudicating immigration and travel benefits. This provides them, for the first time, with a single picture of all the dots of sensitive information to evaluate. Now, immigration and border security decisions will be fully informed before an adjudication is made. All proposed activities of the NVC are reviewed in advance by separate interagency legal and privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties working groups. These groups report directly to the National Vetting Governance Board, an interagency oversight body charged with providing guidance and direction to the NVC and the National Vetting Enterprise. NSPM 9 empowered the Secretary of Homeland Security to assign and oversee a director for the NVC. She subsequently delegated those responsibilities to the CBP Commissioner. The NVC was not envisioned to be a large bureaucracy, so it made sense for CBP to co-locate the NVC with its first CBP beneficiary, the National Targeting Center. But while we are co-located and coordinate closely, the NTC and NVC are different entities with different functions. As Director Conroy just explained, the NTC, and specifically NTC Passenger, conducts analysis and targeting to make tactical adjudication decisions at all points in the travel continuum. The NVC will ensure that those analysts and targeters receive better, more timely access to the sensitive information they need to make those adjudication decisions. The NTC is a beneficiary of the services the NVC is providing. The NVC began a phased deployment of operations on December 12, 2018, in support of NTC's vetting of applicants for visa waiver travel authorization to the United States, also known as ESTA. In the future, if approved by the National Vetting Governance Board, the NVC will endeavor to provide the same level of support to other agencies making travel and immigration-related decisions, including the State Department, other parts of CBP, and other components of DHS. In summary, the NVC is an essential and long-awaited component of the U.S. government's national vetting enterprise. It furthers the 9/11 Commission's recommendations to enhance interagency collaboration to provide a clear picture of threats against the United States so we can take action to protect the American people. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Ms. Gambler to summarize her statement for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Rose, Chairwoman Rice, Ranking Member Walker, Ranking Member Higgins, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify at today's hearing to discuss GAO's work on the screening and vetting of non-immigrant visa applicants and efforts to screen and inspect air travelers seeking to come to the United States. Each year, the Department of State adjudicates millions of applications for non-immigrant visas. These visas are issued to foreign nationals, such as tourists and students, seeking temporary admission into the United States. CBP is responsible for inspecting individuals applying for admission to the United States at ports of entry and processes millions of travelers applying for admission each year. Today, I will summarize GAO's past work on data and information related to the adjudication of non-immigrant visa applications and CBP's efforts to screen and inspect air travelers. First, with regard to state adjudications of non-immigrant visa applications, between fiscal years 2012 and 2017, the total number of applications adjudicated annually peaked at about 13.4 million in fiscal year 2016. This represented an increase of approximately 30% since fiscal year 2012. In fiscal year 2017, non-immigrant visa adjudications decreased by about 7%. On the basis of its adjudication of applications, state either issues non-immigrant visas or refuses them. Between fiscal years 2012 and 2017, the total number of non-immigrant visas issued peaked in fiscal year 2015 at about 10.89 million. This number fell to 9.68 million in fiscal year 2017. The percentage of non-immigrant visas refused, known as the refusal rate, increased over the time period we reviewed. More specifically, the non-immigrant visa refusal rate rose from about 14% in fiscal year 2012 to about 22% in fiscal year 2016 and remained about the same in fiscal year 2017. Non-immigrant visa applicants can be refused a visa on a number of grounds. State data indicate that more than 90% of non-immigrant visas refused each year from fiscal years 2012 through 2017 were based on the consular officer's determination that the applicants were ineligible non-immigrants. Put differently, the consular officers believed that an applicant was an intending immigrant seeking to stay permanently in the United States or did not demonstrate eligibility for the particular visa he or she was seeking. State data indicates that relatively few applicants, approximately 0.05%, were refused for terrorism or other security-related reasons during the time period we reviewed. Second, with regard to CBP's screening efforts, CBP screens all air travelers coming to the United States and seeks to identify potentially high-risk travelers at the earliest point in the travel life cycle. CBP also operates 3 pre-departure programs to help identify and interdict high-risk travelers before they board U.S.-bound flights. These programs are pre-clearance, the Immigration Advisory and Joint Security Programs, and the Regional Carrier Liaison Groups. Pre-clearance locations operate at foreign airports and serve as U.S. ports of entry. CBP officers at these locations inspect travelers and make admissibility determinations prior to an individual boarding a plane to the United States. Under the Immigration Advisory and Joint Security Programs, CBP officers posted at foreign airports partner with air carriers and host country government officials to help prevent terrorists and other high-risk individuals from boarding U.S.-bound flights. Regional carrier liaison groups are located and operate at domestic airports and, among other things, assist air carriers with questions regarding U.S. admissibility requirements and travel document authenticity. CBP data indicated that in fiscal year 2015, these programs identified and interdicted approximately 22,000 high-risk air travelers. However, we found that while CBP has data and statistics on these programs, the agency has not evaluated the effectiveness of these programs as a whole, including having performance measures and baselines to assess whether the programs are achieving their stated goals. We recommended that CBP develop and implement such measures and baselines to better assess the effectiveness of these pre-departure programs, and DHS concurred. CBP has actions underway to address this recommendation and will continue to monitor these efforts. This concludes my oral statement, and I'm pleased to answer any questions members may have.
Thank you. And I thank all the witnesses for their testimony. I'll remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the panel. I'll now recognize myself for the first questions. And I want to begin, both of these are for both Mr. Conroy as well as Mr. Hawkins, and I want to focus in on the travel ban specifically, Executive Order 13780, also known as the Muslim ban. And I want to get down to the core of this. Has it been worth it? Has it been worth it to alienate millions of people around the world, to make certain Americans feel as if they are second-class citizens, simply as on the basis of their faith? According to the GAO, out of 2.8 million non-immigrant visa applications processed in fiscal year 2017, 1,338 individuals were refused entry into the United States because of the Muslim ban. So to begin first with Mr. Conroy, if the Muslim ban had not been in place, would any of those 1,300 or so individuals been refused on national security grounds?
Chairman Rose, in regards to the travel ban and the issuance of the non-immigrant visa, it's difficult for me to answer had those individuals not been issued a visa. The visa is issued by the Department of State.
No, but that's not, sir. What I'm asking, though, is that those 1,300 individuals went through our existing system, part of which you control. They passed everything. Then they were banned from getting a visa. So my question is that would any of them have been refused on national security grounds after having gone through the existing system? Would any of them have been?
I'd be happy to follow up on those 1,300, but if an individual is going through the vetting process and they're not issued the visa, their travel isn't going to be authorized because they don't have a valid travel document to.
Okay, I understand that you don't want to deal with that one particular question, but let's actually look at these 1,300 again. Would they, after having gone through your system, can you tell me whether the National Targeting Center would have been able to identify any high-risk travelers among these 1,300 before they entered the country? If you're just looking at that sample of 1,300 individuals, would you have been able to identify high risk?
So again, Chairman, I can't speak to the actual 1,300, but within our systems in Customs and Border Protection, the National Targeting Center, at the issuance of the visa, we are vetting that information against our holdings for any derogatory information that applicant or that person that has the visa may hit against. Upon reservation and check-in, we're also vetting that traveler again against our data and our holdings to see if any derogatory information exists that would preclude the admissibility. So if the person has the ability to travel with the document visa, has made reservations that can match against our systems, and if derogatory information exists, we could action.
So are you confident in and this goes for Mr. Conroy and Mr. Hawkins, are you confident in the existing system?
Yes, as CBP, we're always continuing to reevaluate our systems. I think it's
But you are confident, and Mr. Hawkins, I'd like for you to answer this as well. You are confident that when someone passes through all of your different vetting systems, you are confident that they do not represent a threat to this country?
As the latest layer in the process, yes, I'm confident the NVC provides to the...
So then I will ask you this question again. Those 1,300 individuals passed through your system, and then they were denied entry to this country based off the travel ban. So you have two options here. And I understand that we don't want to entertain hypotheticals. This is not a hypothetical. They passed through your system. You just said that you're confident in your system. Then they were denied entry into this country. So my question to you is very simple. Those 1,300 individuals, do they or do they not represent a threat to this country? Mr. Conroy first.
Again, Chairman, without knowing who those individuals are and individually seeing the information to run against it, it's difficult for me to answer the question.
You know who those individuals are. They went through your system. You know who they are. This is not a hypothetical.
But Chairman, if they don't have a visa to travel, I can't authorize travel unless they have the appropriate documents to board a flight, to travel to the United States, to be processed at a port of entry.
Okay, so Mr. Hawkins.
Mr. Chairman, the NVC right now is only looking at ESTA travelers, and having only stood up in December, I can't specify
course.
the 1,300, so...
No, of course, I understand that. So, Mr. Conroy, I want to close out with this. 1,300 individuals. Were they or were they not approved, or did they not trigger off anything before getting to the Muslim ban?
Chairman, it's hard for me to answer that question without knowing.
Well, I can answer for that, and then I'll close up my questionings. They didn't. Otherwise, they would have been refused entry on another ground. So they didn't. They checked all the boxes. They went through a system that you just told me that you are confident in. You just said you're confident in our system. They checked all the boxes. And then they were denied entry based off the nation that they are coming from. So I urge you, and please, we'll follow up with a written question here. I really, truly want to know, you can go back and look at those 1,300 cases, whether or not you have confidence in your system, or whether we need to improve upon our system in order to further vet those 1,300 individuals. Thank you. With that, I now recognize the ranking member of Intelligence and Counterterrorism Subcommittee, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Hawkins, the goal of the National Vetting Center is to maximize the vetting potential through robust and near real-time links between the DHS and the intelligence community. So what are the primary challenges to establishing the National Vetting Center is where I'd like to start. Director Hawkins.
Sir, thank you. Some of our challenges are with the sensitivities of some of the information we're trying to access and ensuring that the adjudicators receive that in real time, near real time, to inform their adjudications. So it's working through all the sensitivities, the protections, and so forth to make sure that the process is trustworthy.
Do you have all the sufficient authority to ensure that all the key players across the DHS and the intelligence community are fully participating in the NVC?
We do today, yes, sir.
Good. How long do you think before the National Vetting Center will be mature enough to incorporate data sets related to transnational criminal organizations?
We are looking at expanding beyond counterterrorism information, which is the primary focus today. Our sister NSPM and NSPM-7, which was approved in the fall before ours, is looking at 5 different threat actor categories, transnational organized crime being one of those, which is a primary focus. I can't speak to exact timelines, but it's certainly high on our radar of incorporating that type of data into our process.
Thank you for those responses. Ms. Gambler, thank you for being here today. Approximately 40,000 individuals across the world traveled to Iraq and Syria to join ISIS, with several thousand coming from European countries. Around 2017, as ISIS began to lose some of the territory, a large number began to leave the region, creating a new challenge of detecting the potential return of foreign fighters. So my question to you is, what changes have been made to our vetting system to address concerns about foreign fighters, particularly those with the VWP eligibility, potentially seeking to travel to the United States?
Thank you, Ranking Member Walker. One of the key changes that has been made to the visa waiver program over time with regard to countries' participation in that program is that countries are required to enter into and share information with the United States through 3 different types of agreements. That includes sharing information on lost and stolen passports, sharing information on known criminal history, and other things. And one of the key changes has been the requirement for those information sharing agreements to be implemented. Okay,
thank you. Mr. Conroy, how are your agencies combating the threat from Westerners who may have spent time in Iraq and Syria or otherwise subscribe to jihadi ideologies, but have completely legitimate documents and may have not been flagged in our watch list?
Chairman Walker, in regards to the travel, since the battle with the ISIS, we CBP have been looking at that threat, adjusting our targeting rules, looking at outbound travel, as well as identifying those unknowns that are trying to come into the U.S. as well. Our systems within the recurrent vetting of the visa hot list as well as the ESTA hot list, we're constantly looking at information that may pose or identify those that pose a risk. In addition to that, with the collection of biometrics of individuals, we work with partnerships and our international partners and our interagency and government partners to make sure that we're trying to share information as much as possible to identify those that are known or that are unknown through our capabilities. And we also participate in various foreign fighter task force as well.
Thank you. This is a terror travel hearing, and by no means am I making the case that that's what's happening at the southern border, that we have mass groups of terrorists coming across the southern border. But Mr. Hawkins, I would like to ask you a question there. Do you agree with both former DHS Secretary Johnson as well as current DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen that there's a crisis at the border?
Well, sir, I can only speak to the programs and the vetting programs we're involved in today, which is ESTA. The National Vetting Governance Board will determine where we focus in the future, and they'll determine if it is a focus of high priority for us to fold in.
Is it possible for you to vet someone that we do not know about that's crossing our borders?
For us, no.
Okay. Ms. Gambler, a major lesson from 9/11 was the importance of interagency intelligence sharing. While we had derogatory information on some of the attackers, it did not make it into the hands of those who have prevented their entry into the United States. How confident are you that the changes that have been made are sufficient to prevent any known or suspected terrorists from gaining entry to the United States?
Thank you, Ranking Member Walker. Over time, the U.S. government has made changes to its screening and vetting programs to strengthen the programs and strengthen the security and effectiveness of those programs. One point that I would add, though, is that through our work looking at some of these different programs that are part of the travel lifecycle process, we've identified the need for the Department of Homeland Security to establish performance measures to be able to assess the effectiveness of those programs. In my opening remarks, I mentioned an open recommendation we have to CBP related to them establishing performance measures for some of the pre-departure programs. Another program that we've looked at is ICE's Visa Security Program, and we also have an open recommendation there for ICE to establish outcome-based performance measures for that program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the chairwoman of the Border Security Facilitation and Operations Subcommittee, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Rice, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question I'm going to put to Mr. Conroy and to Mr. Hawkins. Let me just state the obvious. No one wants to allow terrorists or anyone who wishes to harm America into the U.S. I think everyone agrees with that sentiment. But I think that we also, and we have to take this in the context of, a potential complete southern border shutdown, and whether that will actually make us safer, and kind of also talk about the economic impact that that is going to have as well. I think it's important that we remain as a country a country with a welcoming message to the international community and travelers who do not wish to harm us but just want to come here to visit the U.S. So my question is, how do your agencies balance the need for stringent security with the economic impacts that make the travel and tourism industry our second largest export, producing $251 billion in export income in 2017? Again, this is not just about money. I am not taking away the overriding concern of security to our homeland, but it comes with ancillary effects. So that would be my first question. And are there existing programs that help you allocate your resources to address threats while also providing opportunities to those travelers we know to be low risk and making it not so cumbersome and burdensome for them to come here?
Chairman Rice, so travel and facilitation is a challenge, and we recognize the economic security as well as we try to protect our nations from those that come to do harm, national security, other criminal malified elements. Our travel is up 10% this year, and in the air environment is up 22%. We take our targeting and our capabilities to identify those risks important to the nation and try to facilitate those that pose the risk to make sure that they're either not boarding or they're examined, as the other ones that don't, or other travelers that don't pose a risk are facilitated through the process. We also take opportunities within our system, is we call a primary lookout override. So when a traveler's negative match to our DROG, we're able to remove that individual from hitting our systems in the future so we don't inhibit that travel or delay their travel in the future, and we don't have our analysts looking at individuals that we've already previously vetted. We try to build as many efficiencies into our targeting capabilities to mitigate risk and threat while at the same time facilitating those that don't pose a risk to this nation.
Madam Chairwoman, while we are looking at individualized risk determinations on all the travelers, at the end of the day, we are trying to do it in the most efficient and effective way possible to support Director Conroy's vetting of ESTA travelers to not delay innocent travelers as much as possible. So we are doing as much as we can to bring speed to that process.
Mr. Conroy, did the NTC ever have a pilot program involving social media?
So we use social media on a limited basis, the public available information, to identify and assist us in our targeting efforts. We don't use it as the sole decision, but we utilize it to help us as we adjudicate ESTA applications or travel information to see if the individual poses any other further risk. So
you access social media per individual. You don't just do it in a scattershot way. It is an incorporated part of the background checks that you do on people?
It's part of our process when we look at the facilitation and then looking at the individual. When an individual poses a risk and we're doing additional analysis on that traveler who may pose a risk or an inadmissibility or a threat, we utilize the publicly available information to assist us in our determinations.
So it's only after you have made a somewhat positive finding that might be someone that you don't want to let in that you then access social media? Or maybe I'm not understanding it correctly.
So generally, when we have an individual that's hitting to one of our hot lists, first thing we have to do is determine if the person's a match to the information that's being presented, the derogatory information. Once we determine that the person is a match to the derogatory information, is it sufficient to preclude admissibility and take an action to deny travel, deny the benefit, such as an ESTA? Or do we allow travel? Sometimes we use the publicly available information to help assist us in identifying if the person poses a threat, the information they're providing is accurate. And in some cases, we find information that shows the individual maybe has nefarious intentions and helps us make a decision.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the way of the future. People post things on social media. We saw that in that last New Zealand horror that happened. I mean, that was all out there. So I think it's obviously something that should be incorporated in. Ms. Gambler testified, well, in a 2017 report, the GAO recommended that CBP should develop and implement a system to measure the performance of CBP's pre-departure programs. Was this done?
I can give a status update to that if that's okay, Chairwoman Rice. CBP has been making progress on implementing that recommendation. They have told us that they've established performance measures and have been collecting data, and they're working to continue to do that into FY19. We're going to continue to monitor their progress, but the recommendation still remains open.
So did you give them the specific three things that you wanted them to do, or did you just say come up with a system?
We recommended that they come up with a system of performance measures. We did not specify or prescribe what those measures should be.
And are you at liberty to talk about what they are preliminarily?
I think we can follow up with you after the hearing and get you that information, Chairwoman Rice.
Great. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I now recognize the ranking member of the Border Security Facilitation and Operations Subcommittee, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Conroy, under the Visa Waiver Program, nationals of 38 designated countries are allowed to travel to the United States for business or tourism for up to 90 days. What types of protections do we have in place to ensure visa waiver individuals are not traveling with fraudulent documents?
Chairman Higgins, the ESTA program, which is overseen by Customs and Border Protection in those 38 countries you identified. Last year, we processed over 15 million applications. And a part of that, we denied over 130,000 applications. We look at the information that's available and presented to us in the application, and it's not just the biographic information. the biometric information, as well as the information provided in the application to ensure that as we're vetting that application to see if that individual that's applying poses any threat. We utilize that information, and then in addition to that, when the individual's in travel, if we have previous information that the person has been to the United States, we're able to validate their biometrics prior to arrival to see if there's any new information in those biometrics that may show an encounter.
Specifically regarding fraudulent documents, in your professional opinion, are you finding them to be increasingly sophisticated when they're encountered?
The sophistication of the documents is always a challenge, and within CBP, we have a fraud document analysis group where we have officers that are fraud document specialists or subject matter experts.
And that group intercepted, what was the number for fraudulent documents?
Last year, they accepted over 40 million documents, and nearly half of those were travel documents.
And of that number, what was determined to be fraudulent?
I don't know the exact number. I could get that back.
You get that? We appreciate that. There was a 60 Minutes investigation aired in December, effectively saying that the country of Malta is allowing Russian, Chinese, Saudi, and Nigerian citizens to buy Malta citizenship along with the associated European Union passport. What safeguards do we have in place to mitigate any risks associated with the visa waiver country citizenship programs being abused, like the one in Malta, allegedly?
So as part of the visa waiver program, there's an overview from the Department of Homeland Security that we do the country assessments. In addition to, we rely heavily on our foreign partnerships to ensure that information is being presented or shared with us that poses those threats, or if there's fraud or indications of documents being misused.
Is there a process by which a bad actor, nation state that was allowing abuse of that system to be removed from the list?
I'm not aware of that.
I believe there should be. Mr. Conroy, you mentioned in your testimony that Customs and Border Protection works to identify risks as early as possible in the travel continuum. Well stated. I've long supported CBP programs to effectively push out our borders to ensure that nefarious actors don't step foot on U.S. soil. Can you speak to some of these programs that CBP operates, such as the Pre-Clearance and Immigration Advisory Program, and why they're important?
Absolutely. So when we look at our travel continuum, we take the first opportunity of information that's available to Customs and Border Protection. At the NTC, that's the application stage. So as individuals are applying for their ESTA, we're vetting that information against U.S. government holdings to see if anything would prevent derogatory information. In addition, under the Visa Security Program with ICE Customs and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, we work with them in partnership with the Department of State, looking at visa applications at the application stage at 37 locations to identify those that may pose a threat when applying for a visa. In addition to that, we look at the travel information as an individual begins their travel, and as the information from the application now to the travel reservation that we're matching against our holdings. We have pre-clearance locations in 6 countries, and we have immigration advisory programs at 10 airports and 12 airports in 10 countries.
Thank you for clarifying that. It's a program we'll continue to support. And quickly, Ms. Gambler, in your testimony, you mentioned that the December 2015 shootings in San Bernardino, California, led to concerns about non-immigrant visa screening and vetting process. Do you think the admittance of Tashfeen Malik on a non-immigrant visa was a result in a gap in our vetting process? And specifically, how do you think social media vetting, if enhanced, would have perhaps stopped that entrance?
Yeah, Chairman Higgins, unfortunately, that's not something that we've looked at as part of our audit work, so I can't really speak to it. But as I mentioned, there have been changes over time that the federal government has made to strengthen some of the different programs that are part of this process we're discussing today.
Thank you for your candid answer. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Higgins. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for questions.
Thank you, Chairman Rose. Let me welcome the witnesses to the committee. Mr. Conroy, good seeing you in a new role. I remember when you were in Detroit, right after 2009 Christmas Day incident. Mr. Hawkins, responded to Mr. Walker's question that you had everything you needed at the National Vetting Center. Kind of tell me what kind of resources you have at the Vetting Center.
In terms of our staff, sir,
Yes.
we have a fairly small staff, core NVC leadership team of about 15 folks, including government staff and contractors. We also have as per the NSPM, we have an on-site intelligence community support element led by the Director of National Intelligence. And then we incorporate analysts from the vetting partners into our system. So as ESTA being our first process, we have analysts from CBP's ESTA program, from NTC, who sit with us and leverage our process to support the ESTA vetting.
So how many full-time people do you supervise?
In terms of staffing at the NVC, I am the only CBP employee. The other government employees who are there now are currently on detail from other parts of DHS. So I supervise them in terms of NVC activities, but they still report back to their home components.
So you don't supervise anybody?
Well, I have 2 deputies per the NSPM, one from FBI and one from State Department, who work for me, and then my team of a privacy officer, a lead counselor, a tech director, and a chief of staff.
So I'm gonna ask Mr. Walker's question again.
Sure.
Do you have everything you need?
In terms, we aim to be a lean organization. So in terms of our staff, I believe I have today. I think as potentially we grow down the road, that might change, but as what we're doing today, and there will certainly be requests down the road, but as of today, we are okay in terms of our staffing.
So if I asked you, what did you achieve since you were established in 2018, what could you tell me?
Sure. So we've developed a whole technical architecture, which we're happy to brief you on in a classified setting because it involves some of our IC partners. And also we have folded into the NTC's vetting of ESTA travelers and supported their identification of several hundred travelers of concern to support their vetting decisions.
Mr. Chair, I would love to, at least in a non-classified setting, can you provide us that written report of all the good things you've said here today that you are doing?
Definitely.
Ms. Gamler, several members have talked about the gaps that still remain. Do you think CBP has accepted your review and fully committed to closing those gaps?
Thank you, Chairman Thompson. Yes, CBP has concurred with the recommendations that we've made with regard to these programs, and DHS more generally has committed to recommendations we've made in this space. I mentioned our work on the visa security program, for example. DHS and ICE have concurred with those recommendations, and I would add that the department and the components are making progress toward implementing our recommendations.
So again, Mr. Conroy, with respect to what happened in Detroit in 2009, can you bring us fast forward to some of the things we're doing now so that might not occur again in terms of the travel to this country?
Yes, Chairman. So as a result of the 2009 underwear bomber, we implemented our prevent departure program as one of those where we have our immigration advisory programs, and we started looking at denying boarding of individuals shortly after the event, changing our relationship with our regional carrier liaison groups to where we could push out recommendations to airlines to deny boarding of travelers. Shortly after that, we also created the Visa Hot List. We're working with Department of State. We're recurrent vetting information on already issued visas to ensure that if new information is presented, that we can match against that information, make recommendations to Department of State to revoke that visa, and then deny the travel of that individual as well. We are very self-critical of our operation at the National Targeting Center, and we're always looking to improve our processes in our vetting and our partnerships. We look at it from the 4 pillars of authorities, our data, our competencies, and our partnerships. And then within those areas, we look at our partners to see where we can either benefit from their competencies, their data, or their authorities, or their information, as well as providing some of our capabilities and our information to mitigate the future threats. It's a constantly evolving process that we're always looking to improve.
But your testimony is that since that incident, we have expanded and enhanced a number of the processes that we take for people coming to this country.
That is correct.
Thank you. You're back, Mr. Chair.
Chairman, thank you. The chair will now recognize other members for questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. In accordance with our committee rules, I will recognize members who are present at the start of the hearing based on seniority on the committee, alternating between majority and minority. Those members coming in later will be recognized in the order of their arrival. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for letting me ask questions first. I have 2 questions, and just going to ask it to whoever thinks can answer it the best. The first question is, how much do you use biometrics, and how do you use it, and do we need to expand the use of it? The second question is, the flood of caravans and people coming over to the southern border, how is that affecting the vetting process?
Congresswoman Lesko, from the biometrics perspective, every traveler that's a non-U.S. citizen is biometrically processed at our ports of entry as upon arrival. In addition to that, we work with our partners in the vetting process when individuals are applying for various status and non-immigrant visas, for example. When biometrics are run, that we provide support to our interagency partners in adjudicating those biometrics that may hit the derogatory information. In addition to that, we utilize those biometrics on individuals when they're in travel to match that biometric against the biographic to see if there's new information on that biometric that may pose a risk that's not biographically available as well. We have expanded the biometrics from the facial, the biometric entry and exit, as you may be aware, and it helps in the facilitation and the validation of individuals and their identities to their biographic information, anything we may have in our holdings. And that's this expansion as we go forward. It's always a collection of biometrics and not just biographics that we want to match against to identify those threats. In regards to the caravan, we continually support the officers and agents in the field with our capabilities. Last year, we processed over 20,000 calls at the National Targeting Center for assistance. If it's from our southern borders, from our foreign partners, or other agencies that asking us to provide assistance in running and identifying. So any individuals that are encountered along the southern border and information is hitting against that, the officers and agents there can reach back to the National Targeting Center and we'll provide any services that we can within the capabilities and the tools that we have available to support them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And either you, sir, or someone else, has the flood of people crossing the border affected that process? I mean, we've been told by Secretary Nielsen and others that, which I believe we're at a total crisis on the southern border, and, people are having to take, Border Patrol agents are having to take people to hospitals and, diverting them from their jobs and, doing all types of things. And so I was wondering if there is, what you've seen as far as, I'm just concerned that with all of this going on, that we may be missing some terrorists that are coming over our southern border. Has there been an ill effect?
So there is the challenges with that, and I would offer that have a team and come and brief you specifically on those challenges that we are dealing with the border. It is an unprecedented event, and it has some challenges, and I think we see some of the challenges now today. From the National Targeting Center, though, to step it back to our global outreach and extending our borders, we take a hemispheric approach within the Western Hemisphere and working with our key allies in the Western Hemisphere, if it's through partnerships, if it's through capabilities and information sharing, to extend our capabilities with our partners in the Western Hemisphere to target those threats that may pose a threat to the whole hemisphere, and denying those that pose a threat of national security or other criminal activity from getting into the country that ended up into our southern borders, where we don't want it to be the first line of defense. We want our borders to be the last line of defense. And working with our international partners, we are doing a good job, I believe, at mitigating that threat as best as possible.
Thank you. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Slatkin.
Thank you. Sorry to be late. Apologies. And I apologize if some of this has been covered. I guess I would ask, so I'm from Michigan, so we have 3 border crossings. The government has made some major changes, obviously, since 9/11. The threats have evolved, we've reshaped how the government approaches immigration and travel. Can you help me understand where some of the improvements have been and then some of the gaps that you still feel like you have?
So within the National Targeting System, we're always looking for improvements in our capabilities, if it's technology, if it's through additional data, or it's through partnerships of sharing in our capabilities. We're continually looking at the threat to see as it evolves and it transitions that we're trying to stay ahead or identifying those threats as they may move, if it's from northern border, southern border, within our air environments.
So just help me out with some gaps. There's got to be some things that you're working on where you know you're trying to get ahead of something, a future threat, a different kind of threat. Help us understand, just, it can't be all great. Help me understand some of the things you're still working on.
And we're working within our partnerships with our international partners and our interagency government partners is identifying those gaps as the transitions. It really comes down to our partnerships with the intel community, the investigative agencies, state and local, and our foreign partners, and the information sharing that we provide and they provide to help us adjust to those gaps that maybe start to present themselves and mitigate them as possible. I can't really talk to any specific gaps that I'm seeing right now in what we're doing in our efforts to prevent terrorist travel and individuals getting on flights to come into the United States.
Okay. I would just offer, as a former CIA officer, that anytime you say, I have no risks or gaps, it's sort of a tell that you either aren't looking hard enough or you're not thinking creatively about future threats. So, and if you can't say it because it's classified, that's a different answer than you have no worries. But I wouldn't personally want to be on record as saying I have no worries with the way that threats evolve. Sorry, I'm just making sure. Tell me about the visa waiver program. So while foreign nationals from most countries get a visa to come to the United States, others come through the visa waiver program. What are we doing to improve the visa waiver program? Just walk me through where you think it stands and what you're doing to improve it.
So as you may be aware, there's 38 countries that participate in the visa waiver program. When an individual of those countries applies for the visa waiver, the electronic system of travel authorization, we run it through our data for any kind of derogatory information. So we take the biographic and the biometric as well as the additional application information to run against our holdings. We're continually looking at the improvements as how do we take that data and run it against additional holdings, such as the National Vetting Center, and bringing in partners that help us be more effective in looking at those threats, and maybe against information that we don't have access to, but that other partners do that can share it back to us.
Okay. And then one of the things that, and as much as you're able to say in an unclassified setting, just how you've seen since 9/11 foreign fighter travel change and evolve. What are things that you're looking at differently now? What has helped us understand how you've evolved to the new threats, what you've been doing to adapt, and what you're seeing on the ground?
So as we identify the threat, we also started transitioning our threshold targeting capabilities, looking at individuals that are traveling out of the country that maybe go into conflict areas, and identifying those travelers as well. We've adjusted our threshold targeting, identify unknowns of travelers that may be trying to come back to the United States or travel through other routes into the country. In addition, our targeting threshold rules against our already issued visas, as well as the ESTA applications to identify any new information. Participating in numerous foreign fighter task force, and our biggest relationship is with our foreign partnerships, is really identifying those relationships to ensure that we're sharing terrorist identity information of these individuals to ensure that they don't pose a risk and that we can identify them if they should attempt to travel to the United States.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank you. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to our witnesses, I want to thank your agencies for what you do each and every day to keep our community safe. In preparing for today's hearing, some information was provided to members of the committee, and just want to ask your opinion if this information sounds correct. It says on average, the Department of Homeland Security stops 10 known or suspected terrorists attempting to travel in the United States. Does that sound like an accurate figure?
Yes, it does.
And then the information goes on. It says, furthermore, more than 40,000 individuals from over 120 countries traveled to Iraq and Syria to join terrorist groups. Again, that 40,000 number, does that figure seem to be accurate to you?
The exact number, I don't know the accuracy, but I know that there is concerns regarding the volume of foreign fighters.
And I know you talked just a minute ago, Ms. Conroy, about information sharing, but do we currently have in place a vetting program to identify those that are traveling abroad that would either seek to join a terrorist group or seek to provide material assistance to a terrorist group?
So from the United States perspective, National Targeting Center, we do target travelers that are departing the U.S. into foreign locations. We don't necessarily have the information of foreign-to-foreign travel and targeting. That's where our partnerships come in, and our abilities to share information and provide our partner agencies that maybe, or countries that don't have the capabilities to help target against those threats that are traveling through their countries.
And one more piece of information contained in the briefing says that the CBP is responsible for vetting individuals and cargo before they enter the United States at any one of the 328 U.S. ports of entry. That is part of CBP's responsibility. Is that correct?
So within CBP and the National Targeting Center, we vet information from advanced travel. Unfortunately, like in our southern border and our northern border, we don't get advanced travel information to target against those individuals.
And that was going to be my next question, is how do we properly vet individuals that are not entering our country through ports of entry along our unsecured portion of our southwest border? Read reports, news reports that over 90,000 people, or estimates of 90,000 people, will have entered the country just last month across the unsecured portion of our border. And those are the individuals that we have captured. How do we vet people who are not entering our country through ports of entry? Is it impossible?
Unless the identity information is provided to the National Targeting Center, it is hard for us to vet against an individual we don't know about.
And then we want to follow up with one additional line of questioning. There were some questions earlier about 1,300 some odd individuals who had been denied entry into the United States that had been previously granted a visa. And I guess my question is after an individual has been granted a visa, does that end the vetting process at that point?
No, it doesn't. Once an individual's visa has been issued, we still are running it through our visa hot list through recurrent vetting. So that new information becomes available, it will hit to our systems, and we can match the derogatory information that may not have been available at the time of application to see if it raises to a level of inadmissibility or national security.
So the issuing of the visa is just one step in the vetting process?
That's correct.
And I believe there was testimony, or maybe I read in the documents preparing for today's hearing, that vetting continues before an individual is allowed to board a plane. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That vetting continues even as the individuals have boarded the plane and are en route to the United States. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So an individual that has been granted a visa, that does not mean that that individual is automatically going to be allowed to travel to our country. There may be information received that your agency has that would prevent someone with a valid visa from being able to travel if they were a known or suspected terrorist. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I just have one further question, and I think pending any other members here with any further questions, we'll wrap this up. On March 6th, Secretary Nielsen came to testify before this entire committee, and she spoke to the fact that the department makes decisions based off a model. The opiates streaming across the border, fentanyl in particular, coming through ports of entry, also, as she claims, through the southern border. that the people are allocating personnel based off this model, allocating resources based off this model. She also said that they look to this model to determine how to allocate resources in regards to the threat of terrorist travel. Again, over the entirety of the southern border, ports of entry, airports. Over and over and over again, we heard about this model. And when I asked her for additional information on this model that the DHS uses, she informed me that she would love to come and share details with me and the rest of the committee regarding the model. So my question is, do you know which models or models she referred to in her testimony? And I refer specifically to Mr. Conroy and Mr. Hawkins.
Chairman Rose, I do not know those models. I'm more than happy to follow back with our agency to see what we could get for you as far as.
Okay.
Sir, same here. I'm not aware of those.
Do you know of anyone that has used this model? Have you seen or heard of anyone referencing this model in terms of your daily work lives? Again, Mr. Conroy.
In regards to a specific model, I can't mention that, but I know there's efforts from all threats, if it's from narcotics, from national security, that within the National Targeting Center and CBP, that we're working with the department to address those threats.
Sure. Mr. Hawkins?
I'm not aware, sir. I'm sorry.
And so I suffice it to say that if this model does exist, neither of you were consulted in terms of the development of this model. Is that correct, Mr. Conroy?
The National Targeting Center for Passenger, looking at the national security threats in some of the topics that you had mentioned. I don't think I would necessarily been involved in those conversations, but not to say that there wasn't conversations at the National Targeting Center within other divisions.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Hawkins?
Same here, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much. And with that, I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. Members of the committee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to these questions. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. And again, I'd just like to reiterate from both the Republicans and Democrats mentioned, thank you for your service to this country. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.